Our gospel today comes from the Gospel of John, where we hear Jesus speak these words of comfort. Jesus told his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, would have I told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas said, "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on you do know him and have seen him." Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and we'll be satisfied." Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still don't know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, but if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it." Let us pray. Lord, may your words only be spoken and your words only heard, and we do ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Please be seated.
We don't have power yet.
We do on these cords right up here. So we haven't had the certified priest of science here for a long time. So today we thought that, it was probably important to bring back the certified priest of science and see if we can't do a little demonstration here to start things off today. So if you want to plug that one in.
All right.
Pardon me?
I was going to say, West Kennedy, you'll take it up here.
I think I have a plug right here, believe it or not.
There you go.
As long as I can get this open. Okay, is yours working? All right, mine's working. All right, we're going to give something a shot here. Oh yeah, any chance to play with power tools is good. What better way to celebrate Mother's Day than power tools, right?
Ready?
Okay. All right, well, it's Mother's Day, and Mother's Day is a great day for celebration, and what better day to celebrate than with banners and, didn't that feel celebrative?
Only the finest.
We're giving kids more ideas.
You can just pick it up and put it back in the men's room. The guys won't care, so just We actually wanted to demonstrate a little scientific principle right in there. It's called the Venturi effect. You've probably heard of the Venturi effect before. With the Venturi effect, what happens is when air hits this tube, it actually goes inside the tube and starts to spin around in this confined space. It picks up speed, and gaining speed, it gains more force, and therefore is able to send the toilet paper out into the room, up into the air. Same principle, see it work in hurricanes, tornadoes, so on and so forth, the Venturi effect. Jonathan, did I get that sort of right? You don't know that one? Okay. Well, that made my day to hear that. And it strikes me that the Venturi effect is something that we are all reasonably familiar with in our own lives, because in our own lives, sometimes events and circumstances tend to happen in the confined space of our own life, and as we experience them, they begin to swirl around. Somebody after the 8 o'clock service said, "Boy, you hit the nail on the head. My life is a whirling dervish." And so these events pick up speed, and they start to whirl around. It feels like we're in the eye of a storm, in the eye of a hurricane, something like that. And I think the disciples today were experiencing the Venturi effect. They had these things that were going wrong in their life, and these things were beginning to gain steam and pick up speed, and it was really upsetting to them. And so Jesus' ministry has been very positive. Things have been going very well. They have this idea of having a grand and glorious end with Jesus becoming a king on earth. But all of a sudden, things take a tone for the worse. People start to become hostile towards Jesus, not just towards Jesus, but towards the disciples. They threaten them with violence. And it looks like everything is going to come to a grinding halt. Jesus says he's going to leave. He said, don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. And he says, even though I'm going away, I'll prepare a place for you. But in that is that statement, I'm going away. They think, wait a second, no, that's not what we signed up for. Why do you have to go away? And so all these events begin to swirl around and pick up steam, and it becomes like a whirling dervish, like a hurricane, like a tornado, the Venturi effect, and they find themselves subjected to it. I expect you know what that is like as well. I certainly do. And what happens when people find themselves in the Venturi effect is what happened to the disciples is people begin to ask questions. They begin to ask why questions. They begin to ask how questions. Why questions? Why is this happening to me? Why would somebody do that? Why? I just don't understand. And how questions? How could they do that? How could they have hurt me like that? How do I get beyond this? How can I make sense of this? And so the disciples ask these same kind of questions in today's gospel. Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and you know where I'm going so that you can be where I am. And Thomas sticks his hand right up and says, wait a second, Jesus, we don't have a clue where you're going. So how can we know the way? You know, Jesus, what are you talking about? And so he's upset, and it's Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled. But if there's one thing that's really clear in today's gospel, it's that their hearts are troubled. Jesus' words don't seem to help a whole lot. All they do is stimulate a bunch of questions. And so Thomas says, you know, how do we know where you're going? I mean, we need more information. We don't really know. Get this, Jesus. And then he goes on and he talks about the Father. And then Philip says, and you know, Jesus, will you just please show us the Father? If we could just see God, everything would be okay. Then we'd, you know, but we don't. I don't get this. You know, is what Philip's saying. And really behind these questions is this larger question of Jesus, we don't understand what you're doing. We don't understand what's happening. We don't understand why this has to happen. We wish it didn't have to happen. And when Jesus answers Philip, you know, says, will you show me the Father? Jesus doesn't show Philip the Father, but what he does is he redirects Philip towards himself. And so what Jesus does is rather than giving an extended rational explanation to these questions, he simply points people to their relationship with him and the fact that he will be present with them no matter what. And it seems to me that this really is the value of faith in a great many ways, is that faith doesn't always answer our questions. And sometimes churches and religions would like us to think that faith answers all the questions. It doesn't. But what faith does is it creates connections. It creates relationships that give us the strength, that give us the power, that give us the comfort, that give us the camaraderie we need to deal with the situations that generated the questions in the first place. See, that's the movement that happens in today's gospel. The disciples ask these questions. Behind these questions is this larger question, why is this happening? You know, in the middle of the Venturi effect, why is this happening? And Jesus doesn't ever tell them why, but what he does, he says, I will be with you always. I will be with you. And because I'm with you, because of our relationship, we'll get through this. We'll get through this together. And it seems to me, again, that's our experience too. When we find ourselves in the Venturi effect, when life is raging out of control, we tend to ask these questions. But oftentimes it's not so much we're looking for answers, because a lot of times there just are no answers. What we're looking for are connections. What we're looking for are relationships that will help us get through the situation that is provoking these questions. And so we think about how it is that it actually is one of the reasons I think that faith and science get along so well, is that if you think about it, relationships really aren't rational things at all. For instance, why did my parents sacrifice for me like they did when I was growing up? You know, today's Mother's Day, I think about my mom and my dad. Why did my mom sacrifice for me? And you might say, well, because she loved me, because she loved you. Sure, but lots of parents love their kids, but that doesn't mean they sacrifice for them like my parents sacrificed for me, right? And so if you think about it, there's really sort of no rational answer. I know that they did sacrifice. I'm glad they sacrificed. A great role model. It's helped me make those same kind of sacrifices for my kids. But as far as a rational explanation that spells out in very clear analytical terms why they did that, that answer doesn't exist. But I'm glad they love me. Why is Linda crazy in love with me? Linda's my wife, by the way. Why is Linda crazy in love with me? That's a darn good question. I've never understood that one. I truly never have understood that one. You've heard me say this before, and it is just so true. I will always remember our wedding, and that first time I saw her, right as the service started, and she came in that door. And in fact, sometimes, every time I do a wedding now, there's this point where I just get this big lump in my throat, and I have a hard time going on. I'm just like, oh, is this going to be the one I can't quite do? Because it always recalls when I first saw my wife. And I looked at her, and she was just so, she was just that vision of loveliness. And the thing I couldn't believe was that she was going to marry me. It just really floored me, and I still don't entirely get that. I just don't, because it's not really a rational thing. I know that she does love me. I'm so glad she loves me. But why she loves me, I don't know. It's not really, the forte of relationships is not their rationality. The forte of relationships are the life-giving connections they provide so that we can face whatever comes down the pike in life, right? So the forte of relationships isn't that they answer questions, but it's that they build the connections that let us get through the situations that bring those questions up in the first place. And so going back to my assertion about faith and science, science answers questions. That's what science is all about. Science is great at asking questions, answering questions. But science doesn't care a whole heck of a lot about relationships. So the two go hand in hand real well. The one sort of answering those analytical, factual questions, and the other saying, not that it's irrational. I don't think faith is irrational. In fact, I believe it's the most rational choice of all. But saying, this really isn't faith's forte. Faith's forte is the connections it fosters. The connections it fosters with God and the connections it fosters with God's people. And often the way that God comes to us, often the way that God makes God's self present to us in difficult situations is through other people, right? And so this being Mother's Day, we think that's what a mother does. Is a mother is a person to whom we go when we have our questions. Heck, Pink Floyd got that right in The Wall, right? Mother, do you think she's good enough for me? Mother, do you think she's dangerous? Mother, will she tear your little boy apart? Mother, will she break my heart? And it gets a little darker after that, but the point is, maybe that's not the best example. I don't know what I did. Yeah, it would have been a great prelude. The point is, even in this, who does the person go to with their questions? The deep questions. And it's not that mom necessarily has the answers. In fact, this mom doesn't really have very good answers at all. But she listens, and she has that space, and she pays attention, and she's got the shoulder to cry on. And I don't know if you remember this, and some of you are too young to remember this, but in the 80s, in the late 70s and the 80s, there was this palpable sense in the educated community and in the community of sort of the thinkers who was at the forefront of everything, is that we were in the cusp of a new thing happening in the world, and we'd had eons of male-dominated society, and we were about to have the feminine take over in a genuinely healthy way and serve as a corrective to this sort of overblown masculinity. And so things that were traditionally established as feminine, such as going a little bit slower in life, such as making space for relationships in life, such as listening to other people in life, such as being compassionate in life, all the things we celebrate in a good mom, that these would be the antidote to the male task-orientedness, the male tendency to impose our will and be willing to exercise violence to get done what needs to be done, the pace at which we live our lives, which doesn't leave much room for relationships, so we leave that to the women. And so there was this, there's a sense that finally, after the world being subjected to all the problems that come with male dominance, we're going to see this female corrective. And unfortunately, I don't think that happened. And in the search for equality, which is absolutely essential, so very, very important, and I believe in equality 100%. But too often, I think what's happened in this search is that women have just adopted men's lifestyles. And so everybody ends up being busy together, and there is less and less time for anybody, and we all become more task-oriented. We all live life in this whirling dervish. What a tragedy it would be if in this search for equality, we all lost what has traditionally been the domain of the feminine, taking time for each other, going more slowly in life, being compassionate, making space. That's what the world needs more of, isn't it? That's what we need more of in our lives. And somebody suggested that Mother's Day might be called Other's Day, because believe it or not, and this is a shocking statistic, in America, 1 out of 5 kids doesn't have a mom. I mean, or doesn't live with their mom. I mean, that's an amazing thing. And so there's plenty of opportunities to mother. And if a person feels left out on Mother's Day, or because they've never had a kid or they've always wanted to have kids, and I understand that for a great many people this is a painful day, but at the same time it's a day that highlights the opportunities that we all have, no matter what our circumstance in life is, to mother other people, to welcome what has been traditionally the domain of the feminine, and let that be that corrective to sort of the hyper-masculine world. To slow us all down, to do what my mom did for me, to do what your mom probably did for you, to create a space where all the rest of the world stopped, and where I could just sit in my mom's presence, not that she necessarily had the answers, not that she necessarily was the wisest person I ever met, but she had compassion, she listened, she had space for me, and not everybody always did. One last story that I think highlights the truth of this, and then we're done. And this story is another story just about my mom. And you know, my mom lived with us last month and a half. My dad died recently, so my mom has been living with us. And my mom also has Parkinson's. You may know that my mom has Parkinson's. And so I've tried to work from home as much as I could, and just to be home as much as I could, just to be around my mom as much as I could. And so I was sitting there doing some work, and she picked up her phone and called a friend, and her friend is a person named Pat, another woman in the Parkinson's group with her, and Parkinson's group in North Carolina. They're no longer in the group together. And she didn't go into the other room, so I figured she didn't mind if I listened to the conversation. And it was utterly fascinating to listen to this conversation with a friend who both had Parkinson's, to get a perspective on my mother's life, like I've sort of never had a perspective on my mother's life. And she talked about a whole bunch of things, but at one point this other woman, Pat, said to my mom, she said, "Nobody really understands, do they? I mean, nobody who doesn't have Parkinson's really understands what it's like to have Parkinson's, do they?" And my mom said, "Well, they try, but no, they really don't." And the other woman said, just like sometimes moving your foot an inch, they just don't understand how difficult, how hard, and they get so frustrated with us because we're so slow, and so they had this conversation about, and they weren't really complaining, they were just talking about this because each of them did understand. Then the conversation went on, and at the end of the conversation, the woman, Pat, said to my mom, she said, "You know this isn't going to have a good end, don't you?" My mom said, "Yeah, I know it's not going to." She said, "You know, we're not going to end up where we want to end up." And my mom said, "Yeah, I know, we're not going to end up where we want to." And the woman said, "Some other people are probably going to make some decisions for us." My mom said, "Yeah, I mean, I hope they include us, but yeah, they're probably going to have to make some decisions for us." And then my mom said, "But we're just wherever we end up, it's not going to be where we want to be, but we're just going to have to make the best of it." And the thing that struck me about that conversation was they weren't complaining, they weren't bitter, they weren't even crying. They were in this situation and they recognized the tragic nature of the situation, but because they were in it together, because they had somebody to talk to connect with, the situation was bearable. The situation was palatable. There was a way through for them. If they had been alone, probably not. But the way through was together. And that, my dear and beloved friends, really is the promise of our faith. That's the promise of our gospel, is that our faith won't always have all the answers for every question that we're looking for. But what it does promise is that God will be there with us. And it gets even better than that. Because what it also promises is not just that some ethereal God in the sky by and by will be there with us, but that if we've taken the time to cultivate our faith at all, that God's people will be there with us, that God's people will be there for us, that there will be people around us who love us and care for us, so that we may not have the answers to the questions, but we do have the connections. We do have the relationships that help us get through the situations that produce those questions in the first place. We'll have a way out of the Venturi effect. Amen.